Welcome to Keep Smiling, the e-commerce customer experience podcast. Selling products online is challenging and can lead to poor customer experiences. Each episode, we explore how entrepreneurs and organizations in e-commerce are delivering delightfully unexpected experiences to their shoppers and customers. Amazon, Shopify, artificial intelligence, we'll discuss what matters today and what you can do to build a better e-commerce business. We'll show you how. Hello, listeners, and thank you for tuning in to Keep Smiling. I'm your host, Ty Walters, and joining me today is my co-host. Say hello, Michael Melgar.
Hey, everyone.
Today's show features our first interviewee, Jeff Cohen, and we'll be talking about proactive customer service. After earning his MBA in 2001, Jeff's early experience was in textbooks where he developed initial e-commerce strategies for the companies he worked with. One of the first hires he made was a man named Brandon Checketts. Eventually, Jeff and Brandon joined forces at Seller Labs starting in 2014, where they've been ever since. Last year, Seller Labs managed over $100 million in Amazon advertising dollars through Ignite and averaged over 1 million emails sent per day through Feedback Genius. You might know him from the many e-commerce conferences where he's either in attendance or a keynote speaker. Today, Jeff serves as Chief Marketing Officer at Seller Labs, and he's known to many as the face and the voice of the company. Jeff's been featured on MSNBC, Entrepreneur.com, and a number of other industry podcasts. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jeff. It's really an honor to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here and happy to share some knowledge with your audience.
Michael and I met you at Seller Labs, our previous employer, and this is where we were introduced to Amazon and e-commerce, and we had the pleasure of working under and alongside you in various capacities. But Michael, you met Jeff first, so tell us about an early experience.
So right before we even started recording, we were already reminiscing about the early days at Seller Labs, and I was a part of the first 10 members at Seller Labs, and Jeff was instrumental in just kind of helping me, showing me the ropes. He was right at the introduction of like my introduction to e-commerce. Right away, he had this obsession with customer service that really kind of helped structure the way that I saw it during my time at Seller Labs and what I still carry with even to SellerSmile today. And so being a part of that team and being one of the original members alongside Jeff in creating and launching Feedback Genius, it's funny to kind of see how far it's come and, you know, the updates that have happened since then. But if you've never met Jeff before, find a way to pick his brain for a few minutes. He's someone who has an amazing amount of experience and can really drop some knowledge on you. And he's kind of he introduced me to one of my favorite Amazon quotes that said, I think it was, the best place to hide a dead body is on page 2 of Amazon search. Still one of my favorites.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think that, from the very early days of what was Feedback Genius and is now Seller Labs, we had an obsession with customer success, with customer support. And similar to, we've always believed that if we followed the principles of Amazon, they would lead us to our customers being successful. And so from the very early days, we were one of the first companies in the space to have live customer support, to have phone, e-chat, email, weekend coverage. And so for us, we really took an obsession from an early stage of make the customer super happy. And you were an instrumental part of that in terms of the building out of our initial customer success team. And when we started traveling and going to trade shows, it was always amazing because I would get on stage and I would start talking about Feedback Genius and how to message clients. And at the end, I'd say, anybody have a question? And people would start raising their hand and being like, hey, I interacted with your customer success team and I just wanted to tell you they're amazing. And I'm like, okay, does anyone have a question? Yeah, I interacted with your customer success team too. And they're unbelievable. And we quickly learned that one of our competitive advantages in the space was the fact that we do provide sellers a higher level of customer success. And what we're doing for sellers is what sellers have to do when they're managing their clients on the Amazon system. And so we're just practicing what we preach.
Exactly. Ty and I, we just recorded some of our previous episodes around some of the basics on Amazon customer service. And that was one of the main things that we touched on was the fact that you kind of have to have this, what Amazon calls customer obsession. And it sounds so cheesy at first, but when you really think about it, all it means is just taking care of your customers so that they want to come back. And I think that some of what we experience at Seller Labs, providing that sort of service for our customers, is the same sort of thing that, like you mentioned, Jeff, that Amazon sellers need to do with their customers. They need to treat them like their family.
Yeah. And I think it's something that sellers kind of, I don't know if they forget about it or they're so busy running their business, they just don't think about it. I always took the attitude of kill them with kindness. So if I'm talking about a buyer who buys a product and doesn't get what they want, I typically will issue them a refund before they ask. I will send them a new product without them asking for it, because I want them to be overly delighted with the experience that they had with me. Because A, they might put it in their review, or B, they might tell a friend, but C, they're not going to leave upset and disappointed with their interaction with me. And that's ultimately my goal. And, one of the analogies I always use is eating at a restaurant. And when you eat at a restaurant and you have a bad waiter and your food comes out late or something isn't right, and the manager just comes by and says, "We're really sorry that happened," and doesn't really do anything for you, you kind of feel like, okay, he addressed it, but maybe he didn't hear me. But when the manager comes by and says, "I'm really sorry, we're going to take that meal off your bill, I'm going to send you a free dessert," you think, oh my God, you know what? Like, they really want to make me happy. And this is the type of place I want to eat at, because if they do mess up, they're going to own it and they're going to work to make it better. And I think that's the type of business that you want to set yourself up to be, because that's the type of business that's going to be the most successful in the long run.
Exactly. Mistakes are always going to happen. So it's really how you handle that.
I really like that story. Michael and I talk that customer service gets a bad rap. It's sort of like the DMV. People expect it just to be slow and a poor experience when you're interacting with it. But Jeff, in your case, what you're saying is, let's be the opposite of that. Let's be everything that they don't expect in a positive way and create these unexpected experiences that are so good that they have to talk about.
Yeah, it's kind of like, don't put customer support as a reactive secondary thought. Put it as a proactive thought. Here's a really simple one. This one always gets me, right? Somebody writes a review for you. You don't comment. I don't understand why sellers don't comment when they get a review, a product review. All you have to do is log in under your account and say, "Thank you for this review. I really appreciate it." If somebody was to walk up to you at an event and say, "Hey, Ty, I really like that shirt," would you just stare at them with a blank face?
No.
And so it's like, what we have to figure out is like our whole world has changed, right? And it's continuing to change. And as more and more sales move to e-commerce, less and less physical stores are going to exist, which means the behavior between the buyer and the seller is going to fundamentally change even more over time. So how do we add a human element to it? Because remember, people like when that human element exists. And when that human element exists, it really gives people a belief that they're doing business with a real business, a real brand. And that's ultimately what you're trying to do. If your goal is to get seller feedback or product reviews, the more you can humanize the relationship, the more you create a reciprocal relationship where the buyer wants to do something for you. And that's ultimately what our goal is.
Exactly.
Jeff, in previous interviews, you've talked about creating a brand experience on Amazon. Michael and I covered in a previous episode how on Amazon, there's greater restrictions and limitations and constraints in terms of how a seller can present their products and interact with buyers. But in terms of creating this brand experience, we see email communication as part of that experience. How do you see those two fitting together, especially in the context of a tool like Feedback Genius?
Yeah. So whether you're using Feedback Genius or not, and this is where I see people miss the boat, you have to understand the persona of your buyer. So who is the typical buyer of your product? Are they male or are they female? Are they 18? Or are they 30? Or are they 60? Is this a complicated product or is this a commodity product? And once you can answer a bunch of those questions, you can start to put together a brand profile and a brand presence that starts on the Amazon site. It extends to your own website and then extends to your messaging. And so many times I see a brand page on Amazon, a product detail page on Amazon, and I go to the company's website and the images are different. The color scheme is different. Remember, shoppers are interacting between different mediums before they're buying your product. Then the communication that you have with the customer afterwards is an extension of that brand. So talk to me like I'm your buyer. Don't come at me with a robotic voice. Thank you for buying this product. I am a small business. Please leave me a review. It will be helpful. That is not, was that a good robot voice?
Yes, it was.
All right, cool. It is not something that you want to interact with. If I just bought a ping pong paddle, right? Mm-hmm. I want to know why this ping pong paddle is going to make me a better ping pong player. And you better bet that if I'm buying a ping pong paddle that I probably like ping pong. So tie into my obsession or my potential obsession with ping pong when you write this to me and tell me why your product is better. Explain your competitive advantage. Make me feel good about the purchase that I just made. These are the things that you want to do that are going to extend and build the brand. That's where people miss is they want to just sign up for a service like ours. They pick a pre-formatted template and they just let it go. Or they write their email, but 2 years later, they haven't updated their email. And so gone are the days where all of this is set it and forget it. Today, you really have to build this into your overall process, your overall marketing plan, your overall brand to bring everything together between your photos, your detail page, your follow-up messaging, your own website.
And something about this too, Jeff, that I think I've heard you talk about in the past as well, is how a part of, creating a great brand experience is really taking the focus away from yourself as a seller, because especially back in my days at Feedback Genius, whenever we have people like who'd want us to review their messaging, for example, the common pattern that we'd see is that a lot of the messaging was about me. It was like, give a review to me, like tell us about how you like this product. And because we're a small business, we want you to leave us a review. It was all of this language that was focused around benefiting the seller, but it wasn't about, hey, how was your experience? Tell us about things that you enjoyed. Tell us about how you're planning to use this product, things like that. You could tell that, and your buyers can see it as well, that the messaging wasn't there for their purpose. It wasn't there to be helpful for them. And your buyers will know when that's the case. So I feel like that's not a great strategy for getting the end result that you desire, reviews and feedback.
Yeah, it's a classic marketing mistake when you try to make it about you and not about them. And that's kind of the same thing in marketing terms. It's feature benefit. Okay. I don't care what the feature is. I care what the benefit is. What is this going to do to help me? I think one of the conversations that I've shared with quite a few people is if you really want to have fun at a party, go up and ask people questions about themselves and then resist that major tendency to do what I call one up them, which is to say, hey, you been on any trips lately? Then that person goes and talks about the trip. And what's the immediate thing that you do? You want to start talking about a trip that you've been on. People want to talk about themselves and people want to know what's going to benefit them. And so that's actually one of the things I teach when I speak on networking, as I talk about how to interact with people and make the conversation about them, because when you make it about them, they get a lot more engaged in what you're doing. It's the same thing with messaging your clients. And if you understand their persona, then you can really make it about them and give them the opportunity to speak. Make them feel like their voice of giving a review is going to make a difference to anyone else that comes behind them.
I really like that strategy, and knowing Feedback Genius, I understand a seller can create targeted messages towards a group of their products or a specific brand, however the case may be. But in that way, you can tailor your message to the exact persona that will be buying this product. if you're a seller with multiple brands or multiple different products, sometimes that persona might be different. So Feedback Genius allows this sort of hyper customization around that message creation.
Yeah. And a lot of sellers will ultimately come back and be like, well, I have a lot of different people that can buy my product. Okay. Well, if I broke that down for Seller Labs, yes, somebody who's just getting started on Amazon can buy Feedback Genius, and somebody who's doing 5 million a year or 25 million a year can buy Feedback Genius. But we have a persona of the type of buyer that matches exactly what Feedback Genius does. And so that's who we market to. And you have secondary personas, you have aspirational personas. So let's use barbecue for an example. I love barbecue. And people who do barbecuing and smokers, they're typically very passionate. And so if I have a barbecue product, I'm probably targeting my product to that more passionate barbecuer than the once a year barbecuer. That doesn't mean that I don't want the once a year barbecuer to buy my product and give me a good review. That once a year barbecuer is probably aspiring to be a year round barbecuer, right? So talk to who your market is actually focused at, and then use that to kind of drive it back to the other potential markets.
So up until this point, we're talking about creating humanized, targeted messaging that is about the customer, focused on who they are or who they want to become. Let's shift a little bit to talk about some of the terms of service or guidelines for buyer communication. Michael and I consult with sellers who are worried about this and they have a low level of understanding. They either are under the misconception that they can't send emails anymore, this blacklist is out there, or they misunderstand what they could actually be requesting for or asking in emails. That's a large topic, but could you give us your rundown and understanding of that situation, and what can sellers do today using messaging on Amazon?
Yeah. So here's how I would start to answer that. And then we can kind of break this down into some individual pieces. The analogy that I have used is that buyer-seller messaging is like driving down the highway. There's a speed limit. You are allowed to drive down the highway. There is a speed limit. That speed limit is 55. There are people who choose to break the law and drive faster than 55. Amazon then determines, and they're not always consistent, but they then determine how bad your particular violation is. So are you swerving between lanes and driving 80, or are you just driving 75? And different actions driving down the highway will either get you pulled over or not get you pulled over. And so as an Amazon seller, I think one of the challenges that you have is that a lot of this information is not widely known. And then you hear different people speak and you get a confusing message. So we did a survey, and I'll go through the survey pretty quickly here. 6 basic questions. The challenge was we found over 14 different pages on Amazon that had parts of the answers to these questions. And so it's obvious why people are getting these wrong. So the first question was, sellers may email buyers and directly ask for product reviews. Is that true or false?
True.
Okay. So when we asked that question, we had 53% of the people say yes, 47% say false. Wow. The answer is that it's true. And Amazon says that, for you to get reviews, you need to ask for reviews. And the kicker to this is that you have to do it through the buyer-seller messaging application. That's the big kicker in all of this, is that you can't do this on your own. You can't do this directly to them. You've got to do it through their system. So the second question was, when a seller emails a buyer about a purchase, it is okay to reference the product by including a link to the product detail page. True or false?
I think that's technically false, but I think the intention behind including the product link is really what matters.
So 85% of people said that the answer was true. And Michael, you're right. The answer is actually false. If you look specifically at the letter of the terms of service, Amazon says your message cannot include a link to Amazon detail pages or a storefront. This is where it goes into the driving down the highway, right? So what is your intent? And that was what you had said, Michael, and it's a very important word, because what is your intent? Is your intent to get them to buy another product, Or do you have a complicated product and your intent is to drive them to a video to understand how your product works? And so everything you do that violates Amazon's terms of service, minor or major, starts to add up. So the more things that you do, the bigger chance you have of getting in trouble. And I'd love to say that everybody can follow every rule 100%, but we know that's not the reality. So what I say is understand what rules you're following, understand what rules you're breaking, and understand whether you're breaking them in an egregious way or you're breaking them in a very minor way. I'm not encouraging people to break rules, but there are instances where linking to your product detail page makes sense. You just have to understand that you are technically violating the rules and understand what your intent is. And if your intent is to improve the customer experience, you're probably okay in the long run.
Well, and for example, I know we've had like buyer messages where they're like, hey, I'm trying to find this product that you guys offer, but I can't find it anywhere. And that's a perfect example of like sending a product link to where they can find it. That's not necessarily something that would be considered marketing because it's something that your buyer is requesting information on how to complete their purchase, something that helps them in the buying experience. But, I guess technically in Amazon's terms of service, that could always be a bit of a gray area. So it comes back down to your intent.
I'm going to help split hairs a little bit more here. Once you've engaged with a customer, then almost all of these rules go out the window. So if a customer is specifically asking you for it, then you're not violating terms of service. Think of this in terms of like the unsolicited message versus the solicited message. So what I'm reading through for you is more of the unsolicited message, meaning the buyer has not asked you to email them, but you're emailing them anyway. Once the buyer interacts with you, you can then do whatever is necessary to fulfill that customer's needs. I probably shouldn't say anything necessary because people will take that too literally, but you guys know what I mean. All right, so the next question. It is acceptable to email buyers with a coupon code for a future purchase. True or false?
I think that's technically false.
So when asked, it was 52 to 48 of people saying true and false. And the answer is that it is false. This one's pretty black and white with Amazon. It says you cannot contact buyers for marketing and promotional purposes. What it comes down to is that Amazon wants you to communicate about the product that they purchased, not driving them to buy other products. That's the intent. So it's pretty black and white there. All right, here's a good one. Sellers may only send one message per order requesting a product review. True or false?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I'm going to say false.
I think false as well.
So 58% of people said that it was true. The answer is, I don't know. Amazon is still very vague. They use terminology like you can send an email, you can send a email, you can send one email to request customer review. So in some instances, they've talked about it. They've then removed that language, right? So at one point, they literally said one email per order, but then they literally came back and removed that line of text. Now, when we don't know, right? When we get into an area like this where we don't know this answer, this is where we go to best practices. And so again, if you're selling something that requires one or two emails to communicate properly to the buyer, then communicate with 2 emails. If you only need one, then only use one. There's not very many incidences where you need 5 messages. I bought a pair of volleyball knee pads for my son, and I got 5 messages. That's just obnoxious and it's not necessary.
Yeah, that sounds excessive. That sounds like speeding on that metaphorical highway. And what we've seen in the past is maybe some of these bad actors are spoiling it for the rest of us. Amazon will reach some type of threshold. Maybe the complaints get great enough where then they have to change the rules for everyone, which is a pity.
And that is typically what we see. We as sellers want to push for a definitive answer, and then we won't like the answer that we get. So it's like, if we can self-regulate. And so Seller Labs contacted all of our sellers who sent more than 3 messages and told them to stop. Now, from a percentage standpoint, it was like less than 3% of all Feedback Genius users were sending more than 3 messages. We basically said, we don't believe it's necessary. And we asked them to stop doing that. So 1 to 2, I think there's reasons. 3, I don't know. You're probably pushing the envelope. 4 or 5, totally unnecessary.
Thank you, Jeff, for clearing up some of that confusion.
The thing about that as well is that you're not the only person sending your buyer messages. They are probably getting all these emails from other websites, from Amazon itself, possibly from other Amazon sellers. So that's what makes your communication even that much more important, because you're competing for your buyer's attention. And if they're getting the same types of messages, really generic, really unhelpful, these are things that are only going to work against you.
Yeah, that's a video I want to do. I want to log into my Amazon account one day and show everybody my messages as a shopper and what they look like, and some of the ridiculous things that people put in their buyer seller messaging that have led to all of these rules. If you read a lot of these messages, which I know you guys do read a lot, if you read a lot of these messages, you'd be like, oh my God, that's such a violation. Like, why are they saying that?
Yeah.
And so it's Amazon's job to clean this up. So now, Michael, you probably wrote this one. So is it against terms of service to include the following statement? If you are happy with your purchase, leave a review. If you are unhappy, please contact us so we can make it right.
Oh, I remember us putting this together back in the day. That is against Amazon's terms of service now.
It is. And this is a great example of where you need to be keeping up with your messaging. Amazon added a line to their terms of service that says a seller diverts negative reviews to be sent to them or to a different feedback mechanism, while positive reviews are sent to Amazon. So this probably happened in about 2016 when they had the great shakeup of all the review sites. But yeah, this is against terms of service. You cannot use what we call if-then statements. And the easiest way to identify it is just that. If your statement says, if this, do this, if that, do that, you're probably violating. Now, you can easily change that to say, we put customer service first and we want you to be happy with your product. Please contact us if you have any problems. Reviews are really important to the process. Please leave a review about the product. The difference is that I'm not trying to divert the user one way or the other through the language that I'm using.
Exactly.
All right, last one. And I know there's probably another 10 we could go through, but to keep it kind of short, if a buyer leaves a negative review, is it okay to resolve their issue first, then politely ask them to remove their review?
Ooh, we dealt with something similar. I would say that's false.
Okay, well, when asked, it was 51 to 49 of people saying true and false. So people are really confused by this. One of the reasons this one's confusing is because seller feedback is handled different than product reviews. So seller feedback, actually, you can ask for the feedback to be removed after the problem has been resolved. Product reviews, you cannot. So what you can do is you can solve their problem. You can give them really good customer support, and then you can ask them to review the product. You just, again, it's language and it's semantics, but you can't say, will you please remove your old review and write a new one? All you're saying is like, hey, sent you a new product, would love for you to review it. When they go to review it, their old one will be removed and it will be replaced. You just can't specifically ask them to do it.
Thank you for going over that, Jeff. It seems to be very confusing for a seller today, especially you mentioned all of this information is found on 14 different pages within Amazon. And
we do keep track of them and try to, identify when they change and make them available.
And it is that much more important, even with your buyer communications, since there's so many limitations on the different touch points and how you can interact with them. It's so important to keep track of those updates and really try to do as much research as you can and try to get kind of a wide scope of information from different sources, kind of make your, make an educated opinion based on some of the material that's out there from Amazon directly.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to is, what's the intent of the person who's sharing the information with you? It's my intent to get you to do buyer seller messaging, but we try to provide the information in a very unbiased way. And all the information that I provided to you, I can provide a link that we can include in the show notes that will give everybody the exact pages inside Amazon where this information is. And that's the key is I'm not saying don't trust me. I'm saying that you need to understand for yourself what these are so you can understand what you're trying to do. And that's the kicker to it.
And I think kind of a way to really self-guide yourself is asking yourself when you come across these touch points and you're not sure, obviously read up on the material, but also ask yourself, is the decision that I'm making going to benefit my buyer's experience? That's what it comes down to. If the decision that you're making entails like spamming your customer, asking them for a review too many times, asking them to remove their review, things like that, these are things that benefit you. These are not things that benefit the buyer.
Yeah, I guess that goes back to what we talked about earlier, right?
Exactly. And as you mentioned earlier, Jeff, it's very difficult as a seller to kind of still keep yourself grounded in the shoes of a regular day-to-day shopper. It tends to become easy to forget what their experience is like. But if you're in the same boat, you don't want to be spammed. You don't want to be targeted with these review requests constantly. You want it to be something that actually helps you in the long run.
I think that's the litmus test, right? Like if you need a sniff test, a litmus test, like that's the kicker to it right there, which is what I'm doing providing a better user experience? And you have to answer that honestly with yourself. And if you can answer that honestly with yourself and you know that the answer is it is improving the buyer experience, then it's okay. But if you can't answer that honestly with yourself, then you're probably violating the terms of service.
Jeff, with just a few minutes remaining here, I'd like to talk to you specifically about Feedback Genius and its creation. Its inception was to solve a problem for its creator. Brandon Checketts was, from my understanding, he was selling books and he needed to increase his seller feedback rate. So he created a tool. The tool becomes more valuable than the books itself, and that becomes the flagship product of Seller Labs. But Feedback Genius is more than a messaging tool today. It has a products table, tracking product reviews. So we as an agency are using it in multiple different ways. But Jeff, tell us in your own words, what is Feedback Genius? And if a seller has never heard of it, but they want to maximize their user experience or customer experience on Amazon, how should they be using it and why?
Yeah. So I think you pretty much nailed it in its most simplistic form. Feedback Genius is a tool for managing buyer-seller messaging. This is really kind of what I'll call proactive messaging, meaning reaching out to your buyers versus like what you guys are doing, which is more reactive when your buyers are messaging you. And what you're doing is you're setting up an experience for your buyers that continues on after the purchase and completes the feedback loop. And that's what you're ultimately trying to do, because what Amazon wants to see is that somebody searched for a keyword or a search term. They found a product, they purchased that product. Now Amazon wants to know if they liked the product. And so the review really becomes the continuation of that feedback loop to tell Amazon that what the buyer was looking for, they got, and whether they liked it or not. We also provide some review monitoring, and we've got a lot of features built into the tool that really give you the ability to manage multiple marketplaces, multiple accounts, multiple ASINs, and to be able to manage all of this in a systematic manner. Little things that start to add up over time, like creating short names for your products so that when your emails are delivered, your messaging isn't using a 180 character title for your product. Setting up repeat buyer emails so that if people are buying your product more than once, they're getting a different message from you on purchase 2, 3, or 4. Using and taking advantage of the Amazon global blacklist. So the blacklist is people who have told Amazon they don't want to get messages. So ensuring that those messages aren't being sent to those people. And our products evolved over time. The industry has evolved over time. Our product has evolved over time, and we will continue to evolve our product over that time. So, it's been exciting to watch the industry grow and change and our product grow and change as that industry changes.
One of the ways that, like at SellerSmile, that we use Feedback Genius is some of our clients have review notifications coming from Feedback Genius. So anytime there is a new neutral or critical product review that's left, there's an automatic notification that gets sent to our inbox so that we can go back and comment on that ASAP. Kind of going back to what you mentioned earlier, Jeff, where it becomes so important that you can use those touch points every time that you receive a new review, being able to go and comment on them, because that's kind of another place, again, where you have one of the limited customer touch points that can really make a difference. Another thing that we really do, that we use Feedback Genius for, is some of our clients have after delivery messages. That's been one of my favorite features of Feedback Genius for the longest time, is that it allows you to send messages after like an order's been delivered, for example. And I've always loved it because my understanding of it is that it's actually following the delivery events from the tracking number in the customer's order. And it can make such a big difference because it allows you to send a message perhaps like 4 days after delivery or 10 days after delivery. That can really matter, specifically if you are selling different types of products that require a certain amount of time to really kind of make a difference.
I don't know if I should say this out loud, but that's a feature that's kind of blown us away because we created that feature 6 years ago, and still to this day, none of our competitors have that feature. So all of our competitors will talk about how they have an after delivery event, but they all track based off of Amazon and the delivery event within Amazon. What we do that's different is we actually track it down to the actual tracking ID. So we're not just getting the information from Amazon, we're getting the information from FedEx, UPS, and a host of other providers that Amazon uses to deliver packages. And what we found from that data is that 66% of the time, Amazon's delivery information is incorrect. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that 66% of the time Amazon's deliveries are late. A lot of times Amazon's deliveries are early. So what happens when a purchase occurs is that Amazon sets an estimated delivery in the system, and most of our competitors are all using that data to send your message. So we actually had a client who left us and went to a competitor. He started getting a bunch of customer service emails and issues because his messages were coming before the product was actually delivered, even though he was using that same delivered function on their site. When he moved back to our site, all of those customer service issues disappeared. And that's kind of where we started tracking estimated delivery versus actual delivery. And we were able to find that occurring. It seems to spike in Q4 because Amazon's processing out of their warehouse even faster. So I'm not trying to claim Amazon's late in their deliveries. That's not the case. It's actually more often than not that they're early in their deliveries. But if the timing of your message is imperative to the product being delivered, then you want to know that the product's actually been delivered. And so the last thing you want to do is send a message that says your product has been delivered, and they go, it hasn't. And we have a great customer success story that we talk about. A seller who got a product review that said, I got an email telling me that my product was delivered. I opened up the front door and the guy was walking away from the truck. and I went to Brandon and I said, hey, Brandon, can I actually claim that? And he's like, no, that just was dumb luck that we happened to check that delivery ID at the moment that it got updated. But we're within a couple of hours of the actual delivery occurring. So you know that the product is on the doorstep or has been received by the consumer prior to them receiving that message.
And it seems like such a minor detail. But again, going back to like proactive customer service, these are the types of things that make a difference, because as you mentioned, not using the right time to send these follow-ups is just as important as your content, because if you're sending them at the wrong time, you might be inviting critical reviews.
Jeff, thank you so much for dedicating your time today to talk with us about proactive customer service, about Feedback Genius, and about your story and how it all fits together. It was a pleasure having you. I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Ty. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks so much, Jeff.
To find the show notes, which includes links to the articles and resources we discussed with Jeff, go to sellersmile.com/005. If you'd like to take a look at what Seller Labs has to offer regarding the topics discussed today, go to sellersmile.com/SLTOS. There, you'll find a ton of resources. There's a free TOS checklist download, a webinar replay with Jeff Cohen and Cindy Snow, the product manager for Feedback Genius, a TOS slide deck, and information about how to start a free 30-day trial of Feedback Genius. Again, that's sellersmile.com/SLTOS. Tune in next week to learn how to use your customer service tickets to gain actionable insights that will improve your e-commerce business. If you found this interview valuable, hit subscribe and you'll get the next episode straight to your device. Thanks again, and keep smiling.